Have you ever noticed how we drift through life, minds scattered across yesterday's regrets and tomorrow's anxieties, while the luminous now slips by unappreciated? There's something about you which is stronger than the mind, a presence that exists beyond thought, waiting to be unveiled beneath layers of distraction. Modern life pulls us in countless directions, fragmenting our attention like light through a broken prism. Yet the ancient wisdom remains. True freedom isn't found in doing whatever momentary impulses demand, but in the discipline to remain wholly present, to contract your scattered energy into this singular, perfect moment where life actually happens. Only here can you cultivate the art of self-mastery. If you find resonance in these words, I invite you to subscribe and join our journey together. Your life is in your hands. Your responsibility is to make sure that inside you are always full, no matter what happens on the outside. The fragile illusion that others will guide your transformation keeps many trapped in cycles of disappointment. Have you noticed how quickly colleagues, friends, even family lose interest in your personal growth journey? This isn't because they don't care about you. It's because each person carries their own mountain of challenges. The compass of your evolution can only be held in your own hands. Consider the modern workplace. Each morning, you arrive amid a flurry of deadlines, meetings, and interpersonal dynamics. Colleagues inquire about your weekend or comment on your appearance, but rarely does anyone genuinely ask, how is your inner growth progressing? The truth reveals itself. No one is tracking your personal evolution because they cannot. It is an invisible path only you can walk. This realization isn't meant to isolate you, but to empower you with crystal clarity. Waiting for external validation or guidance before taking steps towards self-mastery is like waiting for rain in a desert. The water must come from within. Your commitment to yourself must be unwavering precisely because it cannot be outsourced. What does this self-responsibility look like in practice? It means rising before others to meditate when your bed feels most comfortable. It means choosing nutritious food when sugar calls your name. It means maintaining disciplined training when everyone else has abandoned their New Year's resolutions by February. It means sitting with uncomfortable emotions when distraction is just a screen touch away. The paradox unfolds when you fully embrace this solitary journey. As you become more self-reliant, your capacity to connect authentically with others expands. No longer seeking external approval, you become a stable presence, a mountain unmoved by passing weather. This stability ripples outward, affecting everyone you encounter. Have you ever noticed how some people enter a room and subtly elevate everyone's energy? This isn't accidental. These individuals have accepted full responsibility for their internal state. They don't blame circumstances for their moods or reactions. They've developed the rare capacity to respond rather than react, creating space between stimulus and response where wisdom grows. Self-responsibility also means recognizing that your perception creates your reality. Two people can experience identical circumstances, yet interpret them completely different. One sees opportunity where another sees obstacle. One feels gratitude where another feels entitlement. The difference isn't in the external event, but in the internal lens. A lens you can polish through conscious awareness. Next time someone disappoints you or circumstances don't align with your expectations, observe the automatic tendency to place responsibility elsewhere. Then gently ask yourself, what if I took complete responsibility for my experience right now? What would change? This simple inquiry creates a powerful shift, moving you from victim to creator, from passenger to driver of your life journey. The path of self-mastery begins with this fundamental acceptance. Nobody else can walk your path. Nobody else can transform your consciousness. Nobody else can unveil your highest potential. This realization, though initially sobering, becomes profoundly liberating when embraced fully. It places the pen of your life story firmly in your hands. What aspect of your growth have you been waiting for someone else to initiate or validate? Where have you outsourced responsibility for your evolution? These questions aren't meant to judge, but to illuminate the places where your power awaits reclamation. When you eat, you eat. When you sleep, you sleep. When you walk, you walk. When you drive, you drive. When you listen, you listen. This is ultimately where all of this journey goes. The mind's natural tendency is to wander, pulling you into elaborate reconstructions of the past or detailed projections of the future. Yet life only ever happens in one place, here, in one time now. This eternal present moment is where your power resides, where transformation becomes possible, where life actually unfolds. Everything else exists only as thought. Consider your morning routine. As you shower, is your awareness on the sensation of water against skin, or is it rehearsing conversations for upcoming meetings? As you eat breakfast, Do you taste each bite, or does your mind scroll through the day's to-do list? As you commute, are you present with your surroundings or lost in worries about deadlines? Most of us spend our days physically in one place, while mentally in another, fracturing our energy and diluting our power. This divided attention isn't merely inefficient, it's the source of profound suffering. When you're physically here but mentally elsewhere, you miss the only life you have. You trade the richness of direct experience for the thin gruel of conceptual thinking. The sunset goes unseen, the conversation unheard, the meal untasted, all sacrificed on the altar of distraction. Presence isn't merely a spiritual ideal, it's practical wisdom for effective living. When you bring your full attention to whatever you're doing, whether writing a report, having a conversation, or washing dishes, you access a deeper intelligence. Mistakes decrease, creativity flows, connections deepen, solutions arise naturally. From this focused awareness, the practice begins by noticing the mind's wandering and gently returning to the present moment. Again and again. Feel the weight of your body in your chair. Notice your breath moving in and out. Hear the sounds in your environment. Touch the texture of whatever your hands are contacting. Taste what's in your mouth. Smell the air around you. These sensory anchors pull you back to the now. The contemporary obstacle to presence is, of course, our devices. Each notification triggers a dopamine response, training our brains to crave constant novelty and interruption. We check our phones an average of 96 times daily, once every 10 minutes of waking life. Each check fractures our attention and pulls us from the present. What messages have you missed from life itself while checking messages on your screen? Presence requires boundaries. It means creating sacred spaces in your day where devices are silenced and attention is unified. It means recognizing that your attention is your most precious resource and becoming increasingly selective about where you invest it. It means understanding that multitasking is a myth that diminishes the quality of everything you do. The rewards of presence reveal themselves immediately. Colors appear more vivid. Conversations become more meaningful. Food tastes more delicious. Challenges that once seemed overwhelming become manageable when faced with your full awareness. Even pain and discomfort transform when met with presence rather than resistance. Next time you find yourself rushing through a task to get to the important part of your day, pause and ask, what if this moment is my life? What if this moment matters as much as any other? This perspective shift transforms mundane activities into opportunities for presence practice. The dishes become meditation. The commute becomes contemplation. The waiting room becomes a sanctuary for breath awareness. Where in your life has your presence been most fragmented? Which activities do you rush through without awareness? When do you find yourself physically in one place while mentally in another? These questions illuminate opportunities to reclaim the scattered pieces of your attention. Remember, presence isn't something you achieve once and permanently maintain. It's a practice of continually returning to now, of gently gathering your wandering attention like a shepherd, bringing home scattered sheep. With practice, the gaps between wandering and returning gradually shorten. Presence becomes less an effort and more your natural state. Freedom isn't when you can go to the kitchen anytime you want. That means you're a slave to the mind. Free is when no matter what the mind tells you, you can wait. This is where now you see that sometimes it's necessary to have this obvious structure and discipline. Most people misunderstand freedom, equating it with the absence of constraints, the ability to follow every impulse, satisfy every craving, avoid every discomfort. True freedom is precisely the opposite. It's the capacity to choose your response regardless of internal or external pressures. It's being the master of your impulses rather than their servant. Consider the seemingly rigid structure of traditional monastic training: waking before dawn, eating at precise times, training for specific durations, resting according to schedule. From the outside, this looks like imprisonment, a life stripped of choice and spontaneity. Yet those who embrace such discipline discover a paradoxical truth. Structure creates freedom by strengthening the capacity to override impulses. Imagine establishing 3 specific meal times, 8 a.m., 1 p.m., and 6 p.m., with no snacking in between. The first weeks feel like torture. At 10 a.m., your mind screams for food. At 3 p.m., you feel you cannot possibly wait until dinner. But if you maintain the structure despite discomfort, something remarkable happens. Your body adapts. Your mind stops its constant food narratives, and suddenly, you experience a freedom previously unknown, freedom from being controlled by appetite. This principle extends far beyond eating. The person who trains at 6 a.m. every day, regardless of mood or weather, gains freedom from the tyranny of motivation. The person who meditates for 30 minutes daily, regardless of mental resistance, gains freedom from the dictatorship of thought. The person who sleeps and wakes at consistent times gains freedom from energy fluctuations and insomnia. Structure builds the muscle of non-reactivity, perhaps the most important capacity for navigating modern life. In a world engineered to trigger impulsive behavior through sophisticated psychological tactics, the ability to pause between stimulus and response becomes revolutionary. This pause is where your power resides. This pause is where freedom lives. The challenge lies in creating structures that serve your evolution rather than constrain it. Effective structures are like riverbanks. They don't stop the flow, they direct it, giving it power and purpose. Without banks, the river disperses, becoming a stagnant marsh. Similarly, without appropriate structure, your energy dissipates across countless distractions. Begin with simple structures that address your particular weaknesses. If social media fragments your attention, establish specific time blocks for checking platforms, with your phone in airplane mode outside those windows. If mornings feel chaotic, create a ritual sequence for the first hour after waking. If exercise, consistency challenges you. Schedule non-negotiable movement sessions that align with your natural energy patterns. The key is honoring these structures, especially when you don't want to, when the mind generates compelling reasons to break them. These moments of resistance aren't obstacles, they're the training ground where freedom is forged. Each time you choose structure over impulse, you strengthen the muscle of self-mastery. Eventually, many structures that initially felt confining become liberating habits that require minimal willpower to maintain. They transform from effortful disciplines into effortless foundations that support your highest aspirations. The daily meditation that once demanded heroic commitment becomes as natural as brushing your teeth. The nutritional boundaries that once felt restrictive become preferences you wouldn't want to violate. Ask yourself, where in my life do I mistake impulsivity for freedom? Which areas would benefit from more intentional structure? What daily practices, if maintained consistently, would most powerfully support my evolution? These questions guide you towards structures that liberate rather than constrain. Remember that structure exists to serve freedom, not replace it. The goal isn't rigid adherence to externally imposed rules, but the cultivation of internal discipline that allows genuinely free choice. The ultimate aim is living from your highest intentions rather than your momentary impulses, being guided by vision rather than reaction. A thought has only come to your attention, but that's it. Just because something comes to your attention doesn't mean you have to act upon it. One thing is to hold on to the thought. The second trap is after grabbing it, you invest even more attention to what you have grabbed, which means now you're starting to fuel this thought. The untrained mind operates like an unruly marketplace, loud, chaotic, filled with competing voices, all demanding attention. Thoughts arise continuously, claiming urgency and authority. You must eat now. You should check your phone. Remember that embarrassing moment 5 years ago. Worry about that meeting next week. These mental commands feel compelling precisely because we've never questioned their authority. The revelation that transforms consciousness is this: you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness in which thoughts appear. This distinction may seem subtle, but its implications are revolutionary. When you identify with thoughts, believing, "I am angry," rather than "I notice anger arising," you become trapped in reactivity. When you recognize thoughts as passing phenomena in consciousness, like clouds moving through the sky, you discover the freedom to choose your response. Consider how this plays out in daily life. You're engaged in focused work when suddenly a thought appears. Check your email. The untrained mind immediately obeys, interrupting flow state to switch tasks. The trained mind notices the thought, acknowledges it without judgment, and returns attention to the present task. The difference between these responses determines your effectiveness, creativity, and fulfillment. This skill, non-identification with thought, develops through consistent practice. Meditation serves as the gymnasium where this muscle strengthens. As you sit in formal practice, watching thoughts arise and pass without following them, you develop the capacity to maintain this awareness throughout daily activities. The boundary between meditation and life gradually dissolves. The process follows 3 stages. First, you notice thoughts after they've already hijacked your attention, having followed them for minutes before awareness returns. Second, you catch thoughts at the moment they arise, seeing them before being carried away. Third, you maintain continuous awareness of the thought process, resting as the witness rather than being absorbed in the mental narrative. Non-identification doesn't mean suppressing or controlling thoughts. Such attempts paradoxically strengthen the very patterns you're trying to overcome. Instead, it means changing your relationship with thought, developing the capacity to observe rather than absorb, to witness rather than become. Thoughts continue arising, but their power to compel action diminishes. Beware the subtle trap of judgment. When we notice unhelpful thought patterns, the tendency is to criticize ourselves. I shouldn't be thinking this. This judgment is itself just another thought with which we've identified. True mastery includes embracing all thoughts with equanimity, seeing fear, desire, judgment, and inspiration with the same gentle awareness. Non-identification gradually reveals how many of your thoughts are simply not yours. They're conditioning from culture, family, media, and education, patterns absorbed without examination. As you develop the capacity to witness without immediate belief, you naturally begin questioning assumptions that may have shaped your entire life perspective. This inquiry leads to authentic living rather than automated response. In practical terms, start by creating small gaps of awareness throughout your day. When you transition between activities, pause for 3 conscious breaths, noticing what thoughts are present. When you feel emotional reactivity arising, create space before responding. When you notice yourself reaching for your phone without clear intention, pause and observe the underlying thought generating that movement. Ask yourself regularly, what thoughts am I currently believing without examination? What stories am I telling myself about this situation? What would be available if I stepped back from this narrative? These inquiries create crucial distance between you and your thoughts, revealing options previously hidden by identification. Remember that thoughts themselves aren't the problem, they're simply the mind's activity, neither good nor bad. The suffering comes from unconscious identification, from forgetting that you are the vast awareness in which thoughts appear, rather than the thoughts themselves. This forgetting is normal. The practice is remembering, again and again, your true nature as awareness. Where have you been most thoroughly identified with thought? Which thought patterns most consistently hijack your awareness? What would become possible if you could witness these patterns rather than become them? These questions illuminate the path toward mind mastery. So it's not about being active all the time, and it's also not about being passive all the time. It's about being present in all of these times. The middle way for you to live is both of them. Modern society glorifies constant action, productivity, achievement, and visible results become the measure of a life well lived. The opposing extreme, complete passivity, withdrawal, or renunciation, sometimes emerges as a reaction to this unsustainable approach. Yet wisdom lies not in choosing between these poles, but in discovering their integration through presence. Consider the natural world. A tree demonstrates this balance perfectly, growing continuously while remaining rooted, reaching toward light while anchored in darkness, expanding outward while nurturing inward. The tree neither burns itself out through constant activity, nor remains stagnant through inaction. It embodies the responsive rhythm of appropriate action and essential stillness. This balance manifests uniquely for each person. Some, naturally, tend toward excessive doing, filling every moment with activity to avoid discomfort or silence. Others gravitate toward excessive being, using spiritual concepts to justify inaction when growth requires movement. Your particular challenge depends on your natural tendency, with the path of growth leading toward your complementary opposite. The integration happens not through compromise, but through presence. When fully present in action, doing becomes infused. And with being, effort flows without the sense of an efforting self. When fully present in stillness, being becomes dynamic rather than stagnant, alive with potential rather than collapsed in passivity. Presence transforms both poles from opposition to communion. In practical terms, this integration might look like establishing rhythms that honor both energies. Perhaps your mornings begin with receptive stillness, meditation, journaling, or contemplative walking, creating space for intuition and clarity before the day's demands. Your daytime then flows into focused activity, implementing insights. From morning stillness, evening returns to receptive mode, releasing accomplishment orientation and allowing integration through rest. On the larger scale, you might discover seasonal rhythms, periods of intensive creation balanced by periods of restoration, output harmonized with input, expansion followed by consolidation. These natural cycles, when honored rather than overridden, create sustainable growth rather than burnout or stagnation. The greatest obstacle to this balance often lies in societal conditioning that values visible results over invisible foundations. We receive recognition for what we produce, not for how present we were while producing it. We're rewarded for pushing beyond limits, not for respecting natural boundaries. Reclaiming balance requires courage to value what the dominant culture often overlooks. Listen to your system's signals. Chronic fatigue, irritability, and disconnection often indicate excessive doing without sufficient being. Restlessness, boredom, and lack of purpose can signal excessive being without appropriate doing. Your body and emotions communicate clearly. When balance has been lost, the wisdom lies in heeding these signals before they escalate into crisis. The paradox reveals itself through experience. Balanced action accomplishes more with less effort. When doing emerges from centered being, carries an effectiveness, creativity, and sustainability impossible to achieve through forced action. The most impactful creators, leaders, and healers embody this integration, their outer accomplishments flowing from inner stillness. Ask yourself regularly, am I currently overweighted toward doing or being? What quality does my current phase require more of? How can I bring greater presence to both my action and stillness? These inquiries guide you toward your personal expression of the middle way. Remember that balance isn't static but dynamic, not a fixed point, but a continuous response to changing conditions. Some phases naturally require greater outward focus, others greater inward attention. The key isn't rigid equality between opposites, but appropriate response to present circumstances, guided by moment-to-moment awareness. Suffering in many different variations will happen. The first arrow is the fact that you walk through this lifetime and encounter things that in the first moment are going to hurt you. The second arrow is how you cope with it afterward. Many people are still dwelling in the past, carrying the suffering and pain from that event with them, even if years have passed. Life inevitably contains pain, physical illness, relationship, heartbreak, professional setbacks, aging, and eventually death itself. These experiences cannot be avoided in any human life. Yet suffering, our relationship to this pain, can be transformed through conscious awareness. The distinction between unavoidable pain and optional suffering offers one of the most liberating insights on the path of self-mastery. Consider two people experiencing identical physical pain. The first resists completely, mentally fighting against reality with thoughts like, this shouldn't be happening. I can't stand this, this will never end. Their resistance creates a second layer of anguish atop the original pain. The second person brings presence to the same sensation, observing it with thoughts like, this is happening now, I can be with this experience. This too will change. The physical pain remains identical, but their suffering differs dramatically. This principle extends beyond physical discomfort to all challenging experiences. The loss of a relationship brings natural grief. When we add the narrative, I'll never find love again, or something must be wrong with me, we transform temporary pain into extended suffering. The job rejection brings natural disappointment. When we add, I'm a failure, or my future is ruined, we magnify momentary setback into lasting identity. The counterintuitive wisdom of self-mastery teaches us to turn toward discomfort rather than away from it. When we fully face what we've been avoiding, whether physical pain, difficult emotions, or challenging truths, something remarkable happens. The experience transforms, not because the external situation necessarily changes, but because our relationship to it fundamentally shifts. This direct facing reveals that most of what we fear exists mainly in anticipation rather than experience. The mind projects catastrophic outcomes that rarely materialize. Through repeatedly facing what we would normally avoid, we discover a profound truth. We can handle far more than we believe possible. This discovery builds unshakable confidence, not the fragile confidence based on external success, but the resilient confidence born from knowing your capacity to remain present, regardless of circumstances. The practical approach begins with small challenges. If cold showers trigger resistance, experiment with gradually extending your tolerance, bringing full awareness to the sensations without the mental narrative of discomfort. If difficult conversations trigger avoidance, initiate them consciously, staying present with the emotional discomfort rather than numbing or deflecting. If physical exercise brings resistance, lean precisely into the edge of intensity, observing the mind's protests without allowing them to determine your actions. Through such deliberate practice, you develop the capacity to distinguish between the raw experience and your interpretation of it. You discover that most suffering comes not from the experience itself, but from resistance to it, from the stories, judgments, and predictions the mind generates around it. As presence grows, these mental additions diminish, leaving the direct experience, which paradoxically is far more manageable than the anticipated version. This practice culminates in what mystic traditions call surrender, not a passive resignation, but an active alignment with reality as it unfolds. You stop arguing with what is. You release the exhausting effort to make life conform to your preferences. You discover that freedom comes not from controlling circumstances, but from transforming your relationship to them through presence. Ask yourself, what am I currently avoiding or resisting in my life? What would happen if I turned toward this challenge with full awareness? What narratives am I adding to my direct experience that intensify suffering? These questions illuminate opportunities for transforming your relationship with difficulty. Remember that the goal isn't becoming immune to pain, but developing the capacity to experience it cleanly, without the additional suffering created by resistance. This capacity doesn't develop through intellectual understanding, but through direct, embodied practice. Each time you consciously face discomfort rather than avoid it, you strengthen this muscle of presence. Theory is theory. Knowledge is knowledge. The theory doesn't change your life. The knowledge doesn't change your life. At the end of the day, it is action, action, action. That's it. We live in an age of unprecedented information access, yet decreasing wisdom. Articles, books, podcasts, and courses offer countless perspectives on personal growth, yet transformation remains elusive for many. This paradox emerges from a fundamental truth. Information without application creates the illusion of growth without its reality. True understanding comes only through direct experience. Consider two individuals interested in meditation. The first reads dozens of books, watches countless videos, and discusses techniques extensively, but practices sporadically. The second reads one simple introduction and then sits in practice daily for years, which develops genuine understanding. The wisdom traditions are unanimous. Knowledge becomes wisdom only when embodied through consistent practice. This principle applies across all domains of self-mastery. Reading about nutritional science differs fundamentally from experiencing how different foods affect your energy and clarity. Intellectual understanding of emotional patterns differs from the lived experience of watching triggers arise and consciously choosing new responses. Conceptual knowledge about presence differs from the direct experience of sustained attention. The modern tendency toward information collecting rather than practice implementing creates what we might call spiritual materialism, accumulating concepts rather than transforming consciousness. Just as physical possessions can create the illusion of abundance while masking inner poverty, conceptual knowledge can create the illusion of wisdom while masking lack of embodiment. The antidote is simple but challenging. Prioritize practice over theory, experience over concept, application over accumulation. Rather than reading 10 books on meditation, read one and practice its teachings for 6 months. Rather than learning 5 different emotional regulation techniques, master one through consistent application in challenging situations. Rather than exploring multiple philosophical frameworks, live deeply into one until its wisdom permeates your being. This approach requires courage, the willingness to stumble, fail, and learn directly, rather than remaining in the safety of theoretical understanding. It requires patience, recognizing that embodied wisdom develops gradually through consistent practice rather than instant transformation. It requires discernment, distinguishing between intellectual fascination and genuine commitment to application. The paradox reveals itself through experience. As you prioritize practice over concept, your understanding of concepts actually deepens. Theory becomes illuminated by direct knowing rather than remaining abstract. You recognize the difference between map and territory, between description and direct perception. Knowledge becomes a finger pointing to the moon rather than a substitute for seeing the moon yourself. Ask yourself regularly, what proportion of my growth journey involves information gathering versus direct practice? What concepts do I understand intellectually but haven't fully embodied? What one practice, if maintained consistently, would most transform my consciousness? These questions guide you from knowledge collecting to wisdom embodiment. Remember that the purpose of learning is application, transforming information into action that changes how you live. Each concept you encounter becomes an invitation to practice rather than merely a fascinating idea to contemplate. This shift from passive consumption to active embodiment accelerates growth exponentially. As we conclude this exploration of self-mastery through present moment discipline, take a moment to turn inward with these questions that illuminate your unique path. Where in your life Have you outsourced responsibility for your growth to external circumstances or other people? What would shift if you reclaimed complete ownership of your evolution? How much of your day is spent physically present but mentally elsewhere? What simple practice could help you anchor more consistently in the now? Which areas of your life lack supportive structure, leaving you vulnerable to impulsive rather than intentional choices? What one boundary or routine would most powerfully serve your highest aspirations? What thought patterns most consistently hijack your awareness, pulling you into identification rather than witness consciousness? How might your experience transform if you could observe these patterns without becoming them? Where are you currently overweighted toward either excessive doing or excessive being? What quality does your current phase require more of to restore balance? What discomfort or challenge are you currently avoiding that, if faced direct, might catalyze significant growth? What small step could you take toward facing this challenge with presence? What concept or teaching do you understand intellectually but haven't fully embodied through consistent practice? What commitment to application would transform this knowledge into wisdom? The journey of self-mastery begins anew each morning as you awaken to choice. Will you live this day from habit or awareness? Will you follow unconscious patterns or conscious intention? Will you be guided by fleeting impulse or enduring purpose? True transformation isn't measured in dramatic breakthroughs, but in the small, consistent choices that gradually reshape your consciousness. Each time you return to presence when distraction calls, each time you honor structure when impulse demands deviation, each time you witness thought without identification, each time you face discomfort with awareness rather than avoidance. These seemingly minor moments accumulate into profound transformation. Remember that this path isn't about perfection, but integration, not about eliminating aspects of your humanity, but embracing them with compassionate awareness. The goal isn't to transcend your humanness, but to fully inhabit it with consciousness, allowing even your struggles to become doorways to deeper wisdom. As you continue this journey, know that your commitment to self-mastery creates ripples far beyond your individual experience. Each person who develops greater presence, responsibility, and freedom contributes to the evolution of collective consciousness. Your personal practice becomes your most profound contribution to a world in need of awakened presence. See you next time. Keep your eyes open, your mind curious, and your spirit evolving.